You can train the new people on your way out, Brent Wexler said, sliding the printed org chart across the conference table with 2 fingers, like he was pushing a restaurant bill toward someone who had obviously ordered wrong. Loyalty is nice, Helena. It's just not leadership. The room smelled like overheated projector plastic and burnt coffee. His niece was sitting to his left in a white blazer she had not yet earned enough problems to wrinkle. His brother-in-law sat to his right, nodding like this was all very strategic. I looked at the new org chart, then at Brent. Of course, I said. I'll leave the system exactly as policy requires. If you enjoy this kind of story, the kind where nepotism eventually collides with engineering and paperwork, go ahead and like and subscribe. Stories like this age well. Unlike shortcuts. My name was Helena Voss. I was 48 when Northspire Fulfillment decided tenure was less valuable than family seating. Northspire was a regional logistics and cold chain distribution company headquartered outside Columbus, Ohio. We handled pharmaceutical storage, temperature-sensitive medical supplies, specialty lab shipments, and a growing amount of high-margin retail fulfillment that executives loved because it looked modern in earnings decks. From the outside, it was all trucks, warehouse footage, and delivery windows. From the inside, it was refrigeration tolerances, regulatory exposure, carrier sequencing, facility uptime, and the kind of technical discipline that nobody notices until one compressor trips at 2:11 a.m. I had been there for 14 years. My title at the end was Senior Director of Facility Continuity and Compliance Systems, which sounded abstract enough to be underestimated and important enough to be copied on every emergency email after midnight. In practice, I designed and controlled the building continuity architecture for 6 distribution centers, 2 ambient warehouses, 1 cold chain command hub, and the environmental monitoring pathway that kept Northspire legally allowed to store and move about $280 million worth of regulated product annually. Most people thought I oversaw maintenance. That was cute. What I actually built was the infrastructure governance layer that kept the company's FDA storage registrations, state handling permits, insurer warranties, and customer service level guarantees from collapsing into one another the second a freezer drifted 4 degrees or a backup generator missed a transfer cycle. The system was called Aegis. I named it after the kind of shield executives only remember exists when arrows arrive. Aegis was not just software. It was a controlled continuity framework. Hardware, logic, response trees, escalation rules, vendor locks, facility maps, temperature risk profiles, alarm routing, backup power dependencies, compressor sequencing, environmental audit trails, and regulatory hold procedures. It connected the building management system, the environmental data loggers, the emergency generator network, the validated cold room thresholds, the compliance archive, and the customer notification triggers. Every monitored zone had a response path. Every response path had a time standard. Every time standard had legal consequences if ignored. I built Aegis after a near loss in my 3rd year, when a weekend condenser failure at our Dayton site nearly pushed 1 biologics storage chamber outside validated tolerance for 43 minutes. The product stayed viable. Barely. But the event exposed what Northspire had been pretending was a system. A patchwork of vendor passwords, clipboard checks, text chains, and one facilities manager's memory. That facilities manager retired 6 months later and took half the building's tribal knowledge with him in a fishing vest. I took that personally. Not because I blamed him. Because I recognized the pattern. Companies love calling something institutional knowledge right up until the institution realizes it never bothered to institutionalize it. So I did. Over 8 years, I designed Aegis with our compliance council, insurer engineers, validation consultants, and our largest pharmaceutical clients' audit teams. Every site got a mirrored continuity map. Every regulated chamber got sensor redundancy. Every alarm got severity tiers. Every tier had routing logic. If zone CR 14 drifted outside 2 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius for more than 90 seconds, Aegis triggered local engineering, site operations, continuity review, and compliance logging. If backup power transfer failed at a regulated site, The system initiated temperature preservation sequence review, carrier contingency prep, and chain of custody hold documentation. If a vendor touched a compressor control parameter, Aegis logged it, timestamped it, and tied it to warranty and validation status. It used 527 active continuity rules. Not 500. Not about 500. Real ones. Rule 12 handled evaporator defrost timing conflicts in mixed-use cold rooms. Rule 44 flagged unvalidated setpoint changes. Rule 103 locked emergency response plans if generator load balancing had not been recertified after a maintenance event. Rule 211 triggered product segregation if a sensor pair produced non-reconciling readings. Rule 318 cross-checked vendor service access against the approved contractor registry. Rule 406 governed emergency relocation windows for high-value specialty stock. Rule 502, one of my favorites, prevented a site lead from closing a continuity incident until both environmental stability and documentation integrity had been restored. People like Brent heard words like framework and incident closure and assumed I was talking about bureaucracy. What I was actually talking about was whether $19 million in oncology injectables stayed sellable after a refrigeration event. The most important part of Aegis was not the dashboard. Dashboards are for executives and visiting auditors. The important part was the continuity authorization layer, or CAL, because naming things in cold chain logistics is apparently an arms race between acronyms and insomnia. CAL was my weapon. Years earlier, when Northspire expanded into regulated pharmaceutical storage, our insurer and two major clients required a named continuity architect with delegated authority over validated environmental response logic, contractor access permissions, emergency reroute protocol, and post-incident release certification. They did not want continuity governance owned by generic management. They wanted one accountable custodian tied to the continuity master file and vendor authentication ledger. That custodian was me. Not my team. Not operations. Me. The authorization token for CAL was tied to my credential, my training history, my insurer sign-off, and the client-audited continuity designation approved under our master storage assurance agreements. If I remained in role, Aegis ran in full operational mode. If I left without a qualified successor approved through insurer review, vendor credential reassignment, and client notification, CAL automatically shifted the system into protected compliance mode. That mattered. In protected compliance mode, Aegis did not shut the buildings down. That would have been dramatic, reckless, and illegal. It did something worse for impatient executives. It followed the rules exactly. No non-emergency vendor parameter changes. No release of post-incident product holds without certified continuity sign-off. No modification of backup power sequencing. No unapproved alarm routing changes. No controlled environment storage expansion into additional customer inventory classes. No closure of open validation exceptions. No bypass of documented contingency response steps. The warehouses still looked alive. That was the beauty of it. Lights on. Trucks moving. Forklifts beeping. People in vests hustling around with clipboards and tablets. But the real authority layer sat there, calm and locked, waiting for someone competent enough to inherit it. Before Brent arrived, Northspire was demanding, but sane enough to survive. The COO, Marla Soren, understood operations in the adult sense. Not slogans. Not bias for action. She understood transfer switches, dock bottlenecks, seasonal staffing, temperature excursion risk, and the fact that every cheap shortcut eventually invoices you in capital letters. Our compliance counsel, Adrian Pike, was a narrow man with wire-rimmed glasses and the disposition of someone professionally disappointed since 1998. We worked well together because he understood that regulators do not care how optimistic the org chart feels. At the sites, I had 3 continuity leads and 2 environmental systems analysts who were brutally competent. Darnell and Dayton could hear a struggling condenser fan before the alarm trend caught it. Gina in Cincinnati built the best incident closeout summaries I had ever seen. Luis, one of my analysts, had a beautiful habit of asking one more question than executives wanted. I carried the company invisibly for years. I rebuilt our cold storage validation package after a client audit finding and helped retain a $42 million oncology distribution contract. I renegotiated environmental monitoring response windows with a device manufacturer and saved $1.8 million annually in emergency dispatch spend without widening risk. I designed the generator redundancy map that kept our Cleveland site online through a 9-hour utility outage during an ice storm. I rewrote the contractor access matrix after discovering 17 old vendor credentials were still active across 3 sites, which is the sort of sentence that makes insurers sit up very straight. Nobody gave me a parade. I got something more useful. Trust from the people whose work touched reality. Operations called me before they guessed. Compliance called me before they signed. Clients asked for me by name during audits because they preferred answers built from evidence rather than enthusiasm. I liked that life. It was not glamorous. It was structural. I went home tired in a clean way. I knew which parts of the company were held together by good design and which were held together by prayer and khakis. Then Brent Wexler arrived with family. Officially, Brent came in as Executive Vice President of Network Operations after Northspire's founder shifted to a chairman role and decided the company needed fresh leadership energy. That phrase is usually how boards describe a man they met twice at dinner and once at a golf event. Brent was 41. Tall in the loose way men can be when they have never done a physically necessary thing in their lives. Expensive navy suits. White shirts with spread collars too crisp to trust. Tan loafers in winter, which should have disqualified him on practical grounds. His hair was carefully imperfect. His watch looked expensive enough to require a password. He had the kind of confidence you develop when no one has ever told you no in a room that mattered. He spoke in management podcast phrases. Unlocking synergies. Flattening friction. Family-level trust. That last one should have warned all of us sooner. He arrived from a consumer goods company where, according to his introduction packet, he had led transformation across distributed fulfillment environments, which turned out to mean he had helped roll out a dashboard and had strong opinions about labor utilization from 30,000 feet. His first week, he toured the Columbus Cold Hub in leather-soled shoes and asked why our environmental alarm boards looked so negative. Negative. They were alarms. I said, because refrigeration failures do not benefit from affirmations. He smiled like I had contributed to his image of himself as a man handling strong personalities. Brent did not understand what I did. That part was genuine. He thought compliance continuity was a subset of maintenance and that maintenance was a procurement problem with bolts. During one leadership meeting, I walked through a backup transfer validation issue at the Cleveland site and explained that we could not expand a new pharmaceutical client's storage footprint until the revised generator load map cleared insurer review. Brent leaned back, clicked his pen, and said, "This is what I mean. Helena is brilliant, but she tends to operationalize solvable things into rituals. Operationalize solvable things into rituals." I wrote that sentence down because stupidity should be preserved accurately. Marla said, "These are insurer conditions, Brent." He nodded in the vague, expensive way people nod when listening would reduce their confidence. Right, but we can't let outside parties run the business. Outside parties. He meant clients, insurers, and regulators. The remarkable thing about executives like Brent is that they always say the quiet part with excellent posture. Then the relatives appeared. First his niece, Tessa Wexler, 27, with a brand new title as Director of Strategic Site Integration. Tessa wore white blazers, pointed heels that clicked like accusations, and the expression of someone who had been told her instincts were a substitute for exposure. She had spent 18 months at a lifestyle brand in Austin. Now she was helping reimagine operational communication across regulated cold chain sites. Because obviously. Then came Brent's brother-in-law, Scott Delaney, appointed Vice President of Regional Facilities even though he had spent most of the previous decade in commercial real estate. Scott was broad-shouldered, aggressively pleasant, and deeply impressed by his own knack for making simple decisions fast. I met him once during a site review when he pointed at a bank of compressor control cabinets and asked whether we had looked into putting all that in the cloud. I said, "That is already how you get into trouble now." He laughed like I was a quirky internal character. By month 2, Brent had also inserted a college friend into procurement, another friend's son into site analytics, and one deeply underqualified former coworker into labor planning. Suddenly, every meeting had 3 more polished people in it and 12 fewer useful sentences. The company responded the way companies usually do. Quietly. People adjusted their chairs. Stopped finishing thoughts. Took notes they did not intend to trust. The site leaders began calling me after meetings to ask what Brent's directives actually meant operationally, which was never a good sign. Tessa's role started as vague and then became dangerous. She began standardizing communication by requesting access to incident summaries, continuity dashboards, alarm history reports, and the site escalation trees. At first, I gave her sanitized materials because I assumed she would do what most new executives do with technical packages. Skim the nouns, circle one phrase, then declare a steering committee. Instead, she began editing. She wanted alarm categories simplified because red feels punitive. She wanted incident summaries shortened because dense logs create fear. She wanted contractor access routing centralized under Scott because site-level gatekeeping slows agility. She used agility a lot. People who do not understand cold chain continuity often do. During one review, she looked at the Aegis severity dashboard and asked, "Do all these Amber alerts really need action? Some of them feel like process anxiety." I said, "That Amber alert last month prevented a validated chamber drift at Dayton." She smiled, tight and patronizing. "I'm just saying the system may reflect the temperament of its designer." That line bought her exactly 1 second of silence from me. Then I said, "And the inventory reflects the temperature of physics." Marla nearly smiled into her coffee. But Brent liked Tessa's style because she made ignorance look collaborative. He liked Scott because Scott said yes before he understood the question. He liked family because family creates the illusion of trust without the inconvenience of merit. They thought they were modernizing. What they didn't know was they were replacing load-bearing people with decorative relatives. The purge began softly. First, Gina was moved out of continuity reviews and into cross-functional support, which is a corporate way of putting someone in a hallway and calling it a room. Then Darnell's overtime approval got scrutinized despite him basically preventing 4-figure losses every week before breakfast. Luis was told to start routing environmental exception questions through Tessa for consistency, which was a wonderful way to slow intelligence into error. I pushed back each time. Calmly. With documentation. Brent responded the way men like him always do when facts interrupt choreography. He called me loyal. Then rigid. Then protective of legacy structures, which is executive language for please stop noticing that my relatives are undercooked. In month 4, he announced a network simplification initiative. I read the deck once and knew exactly what it was. A reorganization designed to move authority away from people who understood the system and toward people who understood Brent. Site continuity reporting would be streamlined under Scott. Incident classification would be communication-aligned under Tessa. Vendor access governance would be reframed through central operations. My role would be narrowed to advisory oversight, which is what companies do when they are trying to use your architecture without your authority. I met with Marla after that announcement. Her office smelled like black coffee and legal pads. "He's moving too fast," she said. "Yes. I'm trying to contain him." "No, you're trying to soften him. Different activity." She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You think I don't know that?" "I think you do. I think you haven't decided what it costs to stop him." Marla leaned back. "That is an unfairly accurate thing to say before lunch." I said nothing. She rubbed one temple. "Helena, if he severs continuity authority from Cal, can Tessa or Scott take it over?" "No." "How long would a proper transfer take?" "Best case? 8 weeks. Insurer review, client notices, vendor credential rebinding, site validation, successor qualification. And if he does it anyway? Then Cal will do what Cal was designed to do." She nodded once. Slow. Heavy. That was the last honest conversation we had before the room got expensive. The public disrespect came on a Thursday at 3:30 in the main conference room, in front of operations leadership, site managers on video, compliance, HR, Brent's new relatives, and 2 board people from finance who had probably been promised less theater. The table was polished walnut. The air smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. Tessa had one of those giant water bottles with motivational time markers down the side, which felt insulting in context. Brent stood at the screen with the new org chart. He had that bright, executive calm people wear when they've rehearsed their own unfairness enough to call it strategic. He clicked to the slide. My department was gone. Not literally. That would have required honesty. It had been broken apart and assigned elsewhere. Scott over facilities response. Tessa over continuity communications and incident governance. Central operations over vendor controls. Me moved into a senior advisory lane with no direct reports and a transition responsibility over the new leadership structure. Then Brent said the line from the beginning. You can train the new people on your way out. Loyalty is nice, Helena. It's just not leadership. Not private. Not subtle. Right there in front of people who had worked with me for years and 3 family members who looked pleased with themselves for being invited to the funeral. The room went still. On the video wall, one of the site managers looked down so fast I thought he might sprain something. Scott folded his hands and did his concerned professional face. Tessa avoided my eyes by studying the org chart. She did not have the qualifications to survive. HR's smile froze in place like cheap frosting. I looked at the org chart. Then at Brent. He genuinely believed he had one. That was the interesting part. He thought authority was a shape on a slide. He thought continuity was information, and information was transferable if you attached a family member to it. I closed my notebook. Of course, I said. I'll leave the system exactly as policy requires. Then I stood up, picked up my folder, and walked out. No speech. No warning. No threat. Just one sentence and the sound of 14 years of patience putting on a coat. In the hallway, Adrian Pike from compliance caught up with me by the glass wall overlooking the parking lot. Helena. I stopped. He adjusted his glasses in that thin, irritated way of his. He does not understand what he just did. No. Do you intend to educate him? Not verbally. That got the slightest movement at one corner of his mouth. Good, he said. I find written consequences more durable. I went back to my office, shut the door, and sat down for 45 seconds. Long enough to feel how calm I was. Long enough to make sure I was not acting from insult. Insult passes. Architecture remains. Then I opened the Cal separation binder. Form CA-17. Continuity custodian status change. I had drafted the form myself years earlier with legal, insurer counsel, and one very nervous client auditor who wanted to know exactly what happened if North Spire's continuity architect left unexpectedly. It was a lovely piece of dry corporate prose. Boring enough to save millions. At 3:49 p.m., I completed the trigger fields. Reason for status change, governance severance. Loss of independent continuity authority. Named custodian no longer holds operational control over validated continuity framework. At 3:53 p.m., I attached the reorganization chart and Brent's meeting notice. At 3:56 p.m., I submitted the CA-17 to the insurer portal and copied Adrian, Marla, legal records, risk, and our client assurance distribution list for Tier 1 regulated accounts. No anger. Just sequence. At 4:01 p.m., I logged into the Aegis administrative console and initiated Cal protected compliance mode with custodian invalidation pending successor qualification. That action did 6 things immediately. It froze contractor credential modifications. It locked alarm routing edits. It suspended post-incident product release authority above low-risk thresholds. It prevented generator and refrigeration parameter changes outside emergency stabilization conditions. It flagged all open environmental deviations for certified review. And it generated automatic notices to affected internal control owners and external assurance contacts. At 4:08 p.m., I sent a preservation notice to IT preventing alteration of the Aegis Master Rule Library, vendor access ledger, calibration archive, and incident closeout histories. At 4:12 p.m., I notified our 2 primary refrigeration vendors that continuity governance had entered protected mode and that no non-emergency control changes were authorized without validated reassignment. They both acknowledged within 15 minutes because vendors understand liability better than executives do. At 4:17 p.m., I called our insurer engineering contact, Simone Heller. "Helena," she said, already sounding annoyed on my behalf. "I saw the alert." "Yes." "Is this real or political?" "Yes." She was quiet for a beat. "Understood. Protected mode is appropriate." "Thank you." "Do they know what this means?" "Not yet. That part usually arrives overnight." She was right. At 4:26 p.m., Marla called. I answered. "How far did you take it?" she asked. "Exactly as policy requires." A long pause. "SoCal is in protected mode." "Yes." "And clients were notified." Tier 1 assurance contacts. Not broad commercial contacts." She exhaled slowly. "Jesus." "No. Documentation." Another pause, this one tired. "Are you resigning?" "Effective immediately." She did not argue. That told me she finally understood the dimensions. At 4:41 p.m., I packed my office. One framed photo of my sister's boys at Cedar Point. One mug. One cardigan. 2 notebooks. A tin of mint tea. I left the acrylic service award because corporate acrylic always looks like an apology. Then I drove home. Traffic was heavy. The sky was flat gray. I stopped at a grocery store and bought salmon, asparagus, potatoes, and good bread. My dog, Juniper, greeted me at the door with the righteous joy of an animal uncorrupted by middle management. I took her for a walk, cooked dinner, and opened a bottle of cheap white wine I liked precisely because nobody had written tasting notes for it. At 7:18 p.m., the first call came from Brent. I let it ring. At 7:24, Tessa. At 7:31, Scott. At 7:40, Marla. At 7:46, Brent again. By 9:15, I had 11 missed calls and 4 texts. Brent, need immediate clarification on system permissions. Tessa, Helena, I think something accidentally escalated. Scott, call me. Vendor access is blocked. Marla, we need to speak tonight. I watched all of it while Juniper slept on the rug and a detective on television explained a murder with more competence than most executive summaries. I slept well. They thought I was making a point. What they didn't know is I had simply let the framework become visible. The first stage of panic arrived at 5:42 the next morning when Cincinnati Site B generated a medium-severity refrigeration drift alert in Chamber 2A. Nothing catastrophic. A fan motor lag and rising return air temperature. Under normal operations, site engineering would investigate. A vendor could adjust one control parameter remotely if needed, and the incident would be logged and closed once stability returned. Instead, Aegis flagged the event, preserved the environmental data, and denied the vendor's remote access modification request because the contractor credential registry was frozen under protected mode. Denied. Non-emergency control change. Custodian invalid. Route through certified continuity authority. There it was. My favorite kind of sentence. Accurate and devastating. Scott's first instinct was to override the vendor block manually. He called IT. IT confirmed the system was working. He called the vendor and asked them to just get in there. The vendor refused. No authorized continuity sign-off. No ensure-safe change path. No warranty-safe modification record. He escalated to procurement. Procurement could do nothing because contractor governance was not a purchasing issue, despite 17 years of executive fantasy on that point. By 7:10 a.m., the chamber stabilized through local engineering and standard physical checks, but the incident remained open because protected mode would not allow closeout or release certification without a qualified continuity custodian. Product in that chamber, about $2.4 million worth of specialty injectables, stayed on temporary quality hold pending review. One medium event. One frozen response path. One very long morning. At 7:28, Brent left his first voicemail. Helena, this is Brent. There appears to be a permissions problem affecting contractor workflows. Call me back so we can clear this up quickly. Permissions problem. That was an adorable way to describe insurer-backed continuity governance hardening in real time. I deleted the voicemail. Stage 2 hit by noon. Tessa tried to reroute alarm notifications because she did not like that multiple client assurance contacts had received the protected mode advisories. She wanted messaging centralized through communications. That would have been dangerous even if she were qualified, which she was not. She attempted to update the routing tree inside Aegis. Access denied. Then she asked Luis, my former analyst, where the editable routing layer lived. Luis, who had developed the survival instinct of a very smart raccoon, replied, inside the validated continuity path. She asked again, this time slower, as if speaking to language itself. No, where's the file? Luis told me later that he enjoyed that moment professionally. Because that was the point. There was no file. There was a governed architecture with dependencies, signature states, audit trails, and insurer conditions. But executives raised on PowerPoint love believing every critical system is a password standing between them and destiny. At 1:04 p.m., Tessa left me a voicemail. Helena, I think the team may have overcomplicated this system over time. If you can just point us to the alarm tree and release form, we can probably stabilize until leadership decides next steps. Probably stabilize. I was in my backyard throwing a tennis ball for Juniper when I heard that one. I appreciated the timing. Stage 3 arrived on day 2, when the first client noticed the difference between movement and control. One of our largest pharmaceutical clients, Veros Biologics, had scheduled an audit follow-up call regarding their Columbus cold room expansion. Under normal conditions, we were expecting to clear final continuity review and onboard an additional $26 million annual storage lane for temperature-sensitive trial material. Protected mode changed that. Because Cal had frozen storage class expansion approvals and open validation exceptions could no longer be signed off without a qualified custodian. Northspire had to inform Veros that the onboarding timeline was delayed pending continuity governance transition. Veros did not take that warmly. They did not yell. Corporate clients almost never yell when the stakes are large. They become concise. Their quality director asked one question on the call, according to Adrian, who was there and later repeated it to me word for word. Who currently holds authority to certify your environmental continuity model for our product class? The answer was nobody. That is one of the worst answers a regulated client can hear. By 3:30 p.m., Veros suspended the expansion and placed Northspire under enhanced oversight for all existing biologics inventory. Not terminated. Worse. Watched. Estimated immediate revenue delay, $6.7 million for the quarter. At 3:42 p.m., Adrian texted me. Your former colleagues have discovered the phrase, who currently holds authority, has legal weight. I wrote back, it usually does. Stage 4 began with the building itself. On day 3, a planned quarterly maintenance event at the Dayton site required a non-emergency generator transfer simulation and load verification. Routine. Boring. Necessary. The sort of event Brent's people had been trying to streamline because they disliked the amount of documentation involved. Protected mode blocked the change window. Not emergency. Not authorized. Not transferable. Scott tried to force the issue by asking site engineering to run the test manually and document it afterward. Darnell refused. Correctly. No certified path, no validated record, no insurer-safe closeout. Brent then tried to classify the test as an emergency action to open a narrower response corridor. Aegis rejected the designation because no live site threat existed and emergency classification required a severity trigger plus custodian or equivalent certified sign-off. You cannot bluff a framework into believing a memo. The test got cancelled. That would have been embarrassing enough. But canceling the test pushed the site outside its client-committed resilience review window for 2 regulated accounts. One of them was a surgical products manufacturer with very little humor and very expensive lawyers. By 5:05 p.m., Northspire was in technical nonconformance on a client assurance commitment. At 5:11 p.m., Brent called me 3 times in 6 minutes. The third voicemail had changed tone. Helena, we need to be adults about this. You can't freeze operational continuity because you disagree with the reporting structure. There it was. That always arrives eventually. The accusation that compliance is emotional because the man in charge does not like the shape of the answer. I did not respond. At 8:20 that night, Gina texted me from Cincinnati. They're searching shared drives for your override templates. There weren't any override templates. That was the point. Stage 5 arrived with auditors in the lobby. The insurer sent an engineering review team, and Northspire's largest oncology client sent 2 assurance specialists for a joint continuity review. Not because anyone had lost product yet. Because protected mode itself signaled a governance fracture around a regulated continuity architecture. The phrase governance fracture sounds abstract until 4 people in dark blazers ask for your continuity master file, custodian succession evidence, vendor rebinding logs, open deviation register, and proof that your executive reorganization did not sever insured control conditions. Brent held an emergency conference call before the review and, according to Marla, tried to frame the issue as a temporary internal access realignment. Simone from the insurer interrupted him. "No," she said. "This is a custodian invalidation event with active continuity restrictions." That sentence did a lot of work. By 11:15 a.m., the auditors had identified 3 problems. No qualified successor continuity custodian. No approved vendor credential reassignment. No valid pathway to close 7 open environmental deviations above low-risk thresholds. Those 7 open deviations mattered. Not because they were disasters. Because unresolved deviation documentation accumulates like blood pressure. One by one, survivable. Together, disqualifying. Marla called me at noon. I answered because she had finally stopped pretending this was politics. "The auditors are in the lobby," she said. I assumed. "They want succession evidence." "You don't have any." "I know." A long pause. Then she said the sentence that landed like it should have. "Nobody can certify the holds." There it was. Not nobody can find the file. Not nobody remembers the password. Nobody can certify the holds. That is what real dependency sounds like when it finally speaks in full sentences. Stage 6 was the market. Northspire was privately held, so we did not get the public drama version with a ticker bleeding on television. But we did have lenders, customers, and a pending refinancing package Brent had been bragging about for weeks because he liked saying the word modernization to bankers. Once the insurer review and client oversight notices stacked together, the lenders requested updated risk disclosures on continuity governance, regulated inventory controls, and customer concentration exposure. Translation: explain why your operations chief detonated the adult supervision layer. At the same time, Veros quietly paused a planned long-term storage commitment, and another client, Kendall Therapeutics, shifted one expansion lane to a competitor in Indianapolis. Estimated lost or delayed value within 9 days, $18.4 million. That got the board involved. Board panic is quieter than operational panic. Better tailoring. Shorter emails. Sharper nouns. On day 10, I got the formal request through counsel. Would Ms. Voss be available to attend a special governance review with the board and senior leadership regarding continuity restoration options? Yes. I met with my attorney, Rebecca Sloan, first. Rebecca had represented me once before on a deferred compensation issue and possessed a useful gift. She heard executive phrasing the way radiologists hear a lung. We prepared a chronology. Dates. Memos. Policy language. The CA-17 submission. Client assurance requirements. Insurer conditions. The reorg chart. Brent's meeting note. My training record. The succession qualification criteria I had sent 2 years earlier and updated 9 months ago. Facts. Cold ones. The special review took place in the main executive boardroom. Long table. Too much glass. Expensive water. Air conditioning set by someone who did not trust women's circulation. The board chair, Neil Harrow, was there. Marla. Adrian. Brent. Tessa. Scott. A few directors who had suddenly rediscovered interest in refrigeration. Simone from the insurer joined by video. So did one representative from Veros. Brent looked tired now. His tie was slightly off-center. He had the expression men get when they realize systems do not care how recently they were promoted. Neil began. "Helena, thank you for coming." I nodded. Rebecca opened her folder and did not smile. "God bless professionals." Neil continued. We need to understand exactly what was lost. Authority, I said. Not access. Authority. I walked them through CAL, protected compliance mode, the custodian designation, the client assurance covenants, the insurer-required transfer path, the vendor authentication ledger, and the open deviation closeout restrictions. Short sentences. Clear nouns. No flourish. Then Simone spoke from the screen. For clarity, Northspire's continuity framework was underwritten with Ms. Voss as named custodian. Severing her governance authority without successor qualification triggered the correct protective controls. Brent leaned forward. We are not disputing policy exists. We're disputing whether the policy was designed too narrowly around one individual. There it was. The vanity defense. Always late. Always clumsy. I turned to him. No. It was designed around the one individual you never bothered to replace. Quiet. Not polite quiet. Real quiet. Neil looked at Brent. Were you aware this reorganization could trigger protected mode? Brent shifted. I knew Helena had concerns about transition timing. That was not the question, and everyone knew it. Adrian slid a printed email across the table. Subject: Continuity Governance Risk and Proposed Reporting Realignment. Mine. Sent 6 months earlier. Copied to Brent, Marla, Adrian, and Risk. Second bullet point: removing independent continuity authority from the named custodian without qualified reassignment will trigger protected compliance restrictions under insurer and client assurance terms. Neil read it. Then read it again. Tessa stared at the table so hard I thought she might submit a purchase order to it. Scott adjusted his cuffs. Then Brent made the mistake that ended him. He looked at me and said, "Fine. Tell them you can turn it back on. Just say the system is stable and we'll fix the rest in motion. Just say the system is stable." No engineering adult says that sentence in a regulated room unless they are about to learn something expensive. I folded my hands. The system is stable, I said. Your governance is not. That landed exactly as it should have. Neil asked, what would restoration require? Rebecca answered first. Not an apology tour. I liked her even more then. Then I laid out my terms. I would not return as a subordinate to Brent or any of his relatives. I would accept appointment as Chief Continuity and Assurance Officer, reporting directly to the Board Risk Committee and COO, with independent authority over Aegis, CAL, Environmental Continuity Governance, Regulated Vendor Access, and Post-Incident Certification. Compensation: $410,000 base, 35% annual performance target, $120,000 sign-on restoration fee, and 0.75% phantom equity vesting over 4 years. All 3 of Brent's family placements affecting continuity governance would be removed from direct operational authority immediately. Tessa out of incident governance. Scott out of regulated facilities approval. Any future continuity reporting lines subject to board risk oversight. My former continuity team restored with raises. Gina to Director of Site Continuity. Darnell to Senior Manager of Resilience Operations. Luis to Manager of Environmental Analytics. A formal governance memorandum to the board and client assurance partners documenting that the disruption resulted from unauthorized leadership restructuring and invalid succession handling, not from a system defect or employee misconduct. And one more condition. Brent removed from all authority over regulated cold chain operations pending board review. He actually laughed once. Short. Hollow. This is extortion. Rebecca looked at him like he was mold. No, she said. This is remedial pricing. Neil did not smile, but his eyes changed slightly, which was enough. Brent turned to Marla as if she might rescue him. She didn't. Instead, she said, she is the only viable restoration path. Simone added from the screen, the insurer supports those governance conditions. Then the Vero's quality representative, who had been silent until then, said the sentence that finished the room. We will not expand or maintain current volume without certified restoration under independent authority. There it was. Revenue with a spine. Brent looked at me one more time, this time stripped of charisma and running mostly on disbelief. You'd really let the company bleed over this? I met his eyes. No. You already did. I'm just pricing the tourniquet. Neil asked for a 10-minute executive recess. Brent objected. Scott tried to say something about practical solutions. Tessa kept looking at her phone like maybe another uncle would materialize. 10 minutes became 26. When they came back, Neil sat down and said, "The board accepts your terms." Just like that. Authority moved. Not with a speech. Not with justice music swelling in the background. With board minutes, revised reporting lines, insurer concurrence, and the sound of one man's family plan becoming an expense entry. The permanent damage was immediate and then cumulative. Veros delayed its expansion for 2 full quarters and negotiated stronger audit rights before proceeding. Lost and delayed revenue, $11.2 million. Kendall shifted one entire biologics lane to a competitor. Lost annual revenue, $5.6 million. The canceled Dayton resilience test and subsequent client nonconformance led to a fee credit package and outside validation review costing $1.9 million. Insurer surcharges, emergency consulting, vendor rebinding, legal review, client assurance remediation, and board-directed governance restructuring added another $4.7 million. One smaller medical device client terminated early after the continuity review because they did not like uncertainty around post-incident certification authority. Lost value, $3.3 million. Total measurable damage over the next 2 quarters came to $26.7 million. They had pushed me aside to save, at most, a few salaries and to make room for family. The thing they treated as back-office rigidity cost them more than 100 times my annual compensation. Poetry does not always rhyme. Sometimes it invoices. Brent was not fired immediately. Companies dislike obvious cause and effect when a board member once praised the man at dinner. Instead, he was placed on strategic leave pending operational review, which is executive quarantine with better tailoring. 63 days later, he resigned to pursue opportunities outside the sector. Tessa lasted 5 more weeks in a special projects role that involved no actual projects and no visible trust. Then she was gone. Scott returned to commercial real estate, where hopefully the buildings required less adult supervision. I stepped back in under my new title and rebuilt what should never have been handed to amateurs. We restored Cal through a board-ratified continuity governance memo, insurer attestation, client notifications, and a full vendor credential rebinding exercise across 6 sites. Gina took over site continuity with the exact mix of patience and aggression the role needed. Darnell formalized resilience playbooks that had been living in his head for years. Luis built a deviation trend monitor that turned 3 recurring nuisance events into 1 capital budget approval Brent would never have gotten because it required understanding the noun preventive. 6 months later, the company was steadier. Not fully recovered. That was important. These stories should not end with magic. They should end with accounting. Northspire kept the clients it deserved to keep and lost the growth it had been too arrogant to protect. The board gained a risk committee with actual teeth. Marla regained room to run operations without family furniture in the way. Adrian got to say I advised against this in 3 separate reviews, which I think sustained him emotionally through winter. And I had a different life. A better one. Not louder. Cleaner. I had real authority on paper, not just in practice. My team had titles and compensation that matched the work they were already doing. I stopped carrying other people's denial as unpaid labor. I took Juniper on evening walks without checking my phone every 3 minutes. I cooked more. Slept deeper. Bought better coffee. Replaced my old dining table with one large enough to invite my sister and her boys over for Sunday dinner without balancing dishes like a field exercise. One afternoon in early spring, I was in my office reviewing a capital resilience proposal when Luis knocked and came in holding his tablet. "You might enjoy this," he said. He handed it to me. An industry trade newsletter had published a short piece on Northspire's revised cold chain governance model and board-level continuity oversight. There was a quote from Marla about restoring technical authority to the people who actually understand the architecture. There was also a photo from one of our site reviews. I was in it. Hard hat. Safety vest. Clipboard in hand. Gina beside me. Darnell in the background pointing at a generator transfer panel. Not glamorous. Accurate. Lower down in the article, there was a sentence from a client assurance contact at Veros. Northspire's improved continuity posture reflects mature technical leadership and clearer accountability. I handed the tablet back. Luis leaned against the doorframe. Well, I looked out through the glass toward the parking lot where trucks moved in orderly lines under a pale sky. They finally learned the difference between replacing a person and replacing a function. Luis smiled. That should be embroidered on Brent's luggage. Too classy for him. A month after that, LinkedIn notified me that Brent Wexler had viewed my profile. No message. Of course not. Just the alert. I looked at it once, then closed the app and went back to work. That felt complete. Because this was never really about revenge in the childish sense. I did not sabotage the buildings. I did not hide passwords. I did not create a crisis. I left the system exactly as policy required. They thought loyalty made me soft. What they didn't know was loyalty and design are different virtues. Loyalty kept me there for 14 years. Design made sure the company had to face what it had done when it purged competence for bloodline. That is the part offices get wrong over and over. They assume the quiet people are passive because the quiet people are not theatrical. They assume the technical women are replaceable because their work is hidden inside boring nouns like validation, continuity, authorization, and compliance. They assume nepotism is only offensive, not operational. Then one day the relatives are in the chairs, the org chart looks very clean, and the first real alarm goes off. That is when architecture starts talking. And it always sounds calmer than panic. If this one hit home, if you've ever watched a loyal team get hollowed out so somebody's family could play executive in matching badges, like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments about the moment your old company finally realized the back office people were the building. As for me, I kept Juniper, the better title, the stronger team, and the system. Brent kept his relatives for a while. The compressors were never impressed.